Namaskar, good afternoon. We are really sorry to keep you in the room. We are as mindful of the time as you. So we will try and wrap it up rather quickly. But I think this is an important discussion to have, given that you've just seen what the index looks like, how has it been very carefully put together. So the idea of this panel is really to talk to the researchers involved, and we're going to brainstorm and first of all talk about what are the innovations, what is it that we like in this current exercise, and the second part is to see how do we take it forward, what is really going to be the use of an exercise such as this. For a long time we've been talking about, it's just like credit rating, land record, these are standard big gaps that have existed in the Indian economy for a very long time. So it is good to see states such as MP that have made tremendous, and it's not just MP, in fact, the top 5 have made tremendous ground. And of course, my larger comment on an exercise, because I'm an economist, the exercise is also echoing what the gentleman from Sikkim said. In a dynamic space, when we create an index in a particular year, he said he'll catch up in 4 years. And of course, the point is that these indices should hopefully change. And when the indices themselves change, because the state governments should put in tremendous effort into various dimensions of what has gone into the index, naturally the ranking will also change. Now, the changing of the ranking is to what extent will it become a galvanizer, like the ease of doing business kind of a ranking, the kind of, the specifics that KP went into. That creation of these indices have led to certain degree of competitiveness across states. So in the land market, what do we achieve in a dynamic market by reworking an index, which obviously needs to be reworked because again it is a dynamic market. So those are just some of the larger sort of comments on it. But I'd like to start off with Devendra and then Jayashree. Namita has some specific comments on the broader relevance of the exercise, and also I think the political economy of it, and Pranab, then I'll come to you last, right? So let's stick to 5 to 6 minutes. Namita gets extra because I think she made the most effort to dress. Okay, so so you are looking great. You will have 10 minutes. The rest of you, 6 minutes. Let's start.
Hi, so I'll keep my comments short. So the first thing that I want to, congrats NCER team, this is great work. What I see, by itself this is useful because what we see here is an audit, right? You have the government putting out some data and saying that it has made progress to such and such degree, and now you have some people who are actually going back and checking whether it's true to any level or not. So that itself has a lot of value. What I am really excited about though is the fact that they've created a huge data set which is going to be useful when you link it with other things. So, for instance, NCER itself is now planning to do a perception survey about how useful people find this information, right? We have some preliminary data from 2007 from the PR index, from how people view their tenure security. So that would sort of be a logical database to link this to see whether better access kind of correlates to more tenure security. I'm just throwing out ideas here. The other prospect that I'm really excited about are studies that that deal with litigation of any sort with land. Now, since we are starting with this whole understanding that 66% of the litigation revolves around land, I'd be really interested in using this data set as one of the variables in analyzing courts data. This is the first time I heard about Madhya Pradesh having the revenue courts data online, so that sounds like a very logical place to start. Varying degrees of accuracy. What else? Right, so the value I see in this is that it is sort of foundational work and that people will build things on top of this. One thing which KP Krishnan did point out, and now this is a very recent phenomenon, is the privacy angle to public data, and countries treat it differently around the world. So you have Germany and Hong Kong where unless you make a specific request, nobody is going to give you anybody's land records. But then on the other hand, you have some Scandinavian countries and Netherlands where everything is just open, anybody can access anything. So given that, and given that there are going to be laws governing this, how is it going to affect the scoring of this index? Like, would you still continue to give great marks for people, for states which give full access to citizens and so on? Just something to think about.
I'm not an economist. I look at everything through the lens of a consumer. I'm editor on Magic Bricks. I've been doing research on land and property for the last 15 odd years, and we've tried to index various things. One of my basic problems was that the basics of information package were never available to us to analyze. And what NCAR has done actually is, which many of the speakers in the earlier session said, they actually defined what you should address. Land is such a vague, nebulous subject, and there are so many angles to it. So I think one of the biggest achievements of this report is that you've been able to figure out what should be addressed first. So maybe a Sikkim would like to give itself 4 years to resurvey, but I think what they would then be able to achieve is, celebrate the smaller successes of being able to digitize something well and so on, and not really bother about am I number one, but what works in my ecosystem. Now I'll go back to two sets of consumers I'm going to be talking about. One is the actual user of the property. We have millions of users on our site, and the common problem that keeps coming up in any show that we do is that the titles, whether the titles are clean. And it's very, very difficult for an individual consumer who's buying from a developer to know whether the developer actually assessed whether the land records were clean. Who owns that land? You have, if you look at the litigations around the property market today, one of the biggest things that you see is in that joint venture between a developer who could be just the marketer and the landowner who actually is the FSI holder. Now, who is to be held accountable? In RERA, Gurgaon said it is the landholder, the guy who holds the FSI, who is the owner of the land, and therefore all the responsibility is his. The joint venture partner has only marketed and sold a dream. But the point is that the consumer bought that dream from the marketer, right? So it's a very complex issue, and I think it's good to address the various components of that, and I'm very glad that there's some data out there which we could keep referring to, and I really congratulate you on the project. The second thing is the buyer. The second big buyer is the property developer. When developers aggregate land, it is one of the most complex exercises anyone does in the market. Recently, there are some videos that, we constantly talk to people, so there are some videos that you can access on our channel where we keep highlighting these issues. One of the developers told me there were 21 owners of a particular piece of property. Some of them were minors. They bought the land 22 years ago. Today, the minor has become a major, and the minor has challenged it. 22 years, that genealogy is very, very, very critical. Even if the land title was fine, everybody was okay with selling that land to the developer at that point of time. Today, the minor has grown up and can challenge, and there's nothing anyone can do. So there has to be NOCs from everybody, including the guardian of the minor, who has to give an NOC to the developer. It's a very, very difficult situation, and therefore the genealogy is extremely critical. Just these two.
So, just as a question to what you mentioned about the cities in particular, do you think an exercise like this because the idea is also to suggest what more can be done, do you think it makes sense to develop this also for cities rather than at a state level?
I believe so, because there are two ways of looking at it. Digitizing rural records is much easier because, like many people said, rural records are a little cleaner than urban records, and the land is less valuable than urban land, which is extremely costly. But if you don't, you have to start somewhere, and I think most states, what they've done is they've started with the rural, because it's easier. And I was speaking to Karnataka, the Land Records Office says that they have consciously gone after rural land. Urban land is highly politicized, and there is so much political interference in urban digitizing of urban records, that they would, you know, where it's possible they do, but it's very, very minuscule. There is, I think you should think of cities, and in the next round, there should be a cities index. Which cities? Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Hubli, Dharwad, maybe, Coimbatore. Smaller cities, I think, may find it a little easier to, it will be easier to digitize, but we'll only know that when they undertake an exercise as humongous as what they've done right now. What you've done is at the state level. It would be interesting to know whether cities are able to do the same. My guesstimate is that it's way more complex.
Namita?
Good evening, everyone. I think this is a really important piece of work that has been put together, and I want to start by congratulating Professor Gupta, Mr. Sanan, Prerna, Anika, and the entire team for putting this together. As someone who's been working in the land for a decade now, you know, there has been very little attention paid to generation of information and data so that we can actually analyze and evaluate what policies the government is putting out. And the biggest problem there is that, you know, government data largely has been a black hole for most of our independent Indian history. It's only post the Right to Information 5, which, Section 4 of which imposes an obligation upon the government to make a proactive disclosure of all information that belongs with the government. And on land records, all of this information is really government information. It's only pursuant to that section and the, the report of the task force on the implementation of Section 4, which imposes an obligation to make information available in digital form, is when, you know, we begin to see efforts to bring out this kind of information. And I think this is really important at a time when, you know, for the longest time, government has been expecting than what we've been expecting of the government. I mean, when we, especially in the context of the right to property and property rights in general, I mean, I don't know, aware of the fact that, you know, it's 70 years since our constitution came into being, and we had a fundamental right to property in the constitution, and that was actually removed. And it was removed ostensibly because of, you know, what Professor Ram Singh was mentioning earlier, that, you know, land reforms couldn't happen. Like, basically he was saying that the state has failed at land reforms, and it has also failed at land markets, at the creation of land markets. And the reason why the right to property was done away with in 1978 was because it was preventing land reforms from happening. But even after the right went away, actually no land reforms have happened. So in the sense that there have been huge failures in accomplishing that. And really what we see is that there has been much more land grabs in the period post the right to property. I mean, so if the idea is that people's rights were actually preventing land reforms from happening and redistribution happening, that's not really happened. In fact, we are in a situation today where 9 Indian billionaires, according to the Oxfam report, have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the population. And this is particularly important for land because 80% of India's population at the time of independence was dependent upon land for their livelihood, and it is still 60% today that is dependent upon land for their livelihood. So working on land and, you know, bringing this information out is really important. And within that larger spectrum, what work has been done here is really important. Because, as Mr. Sanan eloquently put it at a talk that he gave at my institution many years ago, is that, you know, garbage in is garbage out if the information on the ground is not correct. And that's why we have to look at, you know, why there's emphasis on digitization. What is the history of the land records modernization program? I mean, this program, as is mentioned in the report, started a few decades ago. And the idea then was to do exactly the sorts of things that people on the previous panel have said, that, you know, there should be updated land surveys and so on. And suddenly the focus has shifted to digitization. And, again, as was also mentioned earlier, is that we have to, whenever we do something, we have to think about, okay, why are we doing this? And who is it going to benefit and who is it not going to benefit? And I think that conversation about digitization in general, we are seeing it in every space. You know, obviously, it's good for technology companies, but we are seeing a digitization of everything, and we have to, you know, think about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now, with that caveat in mind, looking specifically at the index, I think it's a very meticulous and rigorous assessment, and I've been, been a part of the process of its making, and I think really a lot of factors have been taken into consideration, and information has been brought out. But as was pointed out in earlier sessions, of course, it excludes urban land. It also excludes perhaps land which comes under the scheduled areas and lands where there are disputes between the forest department and the revenue department. So if you look at some of the states in the index, we find that many of the states that are here, like MP, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, they all have significant percentage of the land as scheduled area. So a study that we did estimated that 13% of India's geographical area is in the scheduled area, and half of Chhattisgarh, more than half of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand have area in the scheduled area. The other thing that I wanted to note was that joint ownership has been sort of looked down upon in terms of identifying the index. But actually, when we think about it, we have to think about whether that's a good thing in terms of assessing the index, because generally joint ownership is being encouraged in many states in order to get women's rights on the land and on the property, and rights of. I mean, there's an entire movement in play to remove discriminatory laws that were there with respect to agricultural land inheritance and so on. And Devendra has done some work on amendments to the Hindu Succession Act. So all those were to get more and more names onto the land record. So I think we should not devalue that effort here. And then, I think what's really interesting is how much there is a difference between what the government is doing and what the government is willing to put out into the public domain. In the sense that Mr. Krishnan referred to the fact that, Gujarat has done all this important work in land surveys. I cannot testify to the work itself, but what we do see in the index is Gujarat is very low in the index. And my personal experience of working in Gujarat is that, the information, the cadastral maps, for instance, I mean, I was involved in working on the land that was being acquired for the Mundra port. And the cadastral map was simply not available, and the government would not put it out. So no wonder Gujarat is very much lower down on the index. And I think that many other states, it's very interesting, and I think that's why this work is important, is because, when you meet with government officials in there, and especially I was at a workshop at the IS Academy last year, and every government official from every state, was saying that we have done everything, and everything is digitized, and everything is out, but none of this had been made public at that point of time. And I think that is the important question, is that, it's not enough for the government to say that things have been done. It is for us as citizens to evaluate what the government has done. And to that extent, this index is an important tool. That being, is a very important tool. And, but at the same time, we have to be careful. Whenever we have an index, there's a danger of comparing apples and oranges. Land is very diverse in India. We have, mountains and forests and, agricultural land, plain land, tribal, forested land, and so on. And if we look at some of the states here, actually, it is, and relating this to some of the work that we have done on land acquisition litigation, if you look at some of the states here, Punjab and Haryana, for instance, have the maximum amount of litigation on land acquisition, because this is fertile agricultural land with a lot of people who are dependent upon the land for their livelihood, Whereas states like Gujarat and Rajasthan, a lot of land has been grabbed actually. But at the same time, there isn't a lot of litigation. Why? Because a lot of this is what we know as common land. A lot of it is, land that is not, that has not for the longest time been fertile and available for cultivation. So lots of communities have been dependent upon the land for their livelihood. And so it is much easier to have, it would be much easier to have more updated records of rights if actually your amount of land, the number of people dependent upon the land from an agricultural point of view, which actually allows for individual ownership of land. So in India, there are two types of lands. There's individual land, and then there is, common lands. And so a state where the majority of the land is fertile and is individually owned as agricultural land, obviously there'll be a lot of complexity with respect to the records as compared to states where a large proportion of the land is actually common land. So I think, these things have to be kept in mind as we look at the index. And if we look at, the poor states, I mean, I felt very sorry for this, the ones that were at the bottom of the index. But if we look at them, For instance, Bihar. I mean, Bihar hasn't had an updated land survey for the entire state since the 1970s. And when I was in Bihar last year, they are doing an excellent job in terms of they have land records. I mean, there were like these aching archives of files from the 1700s, 1800s, which they are now digitizing. But I asked them, "Are you planning to make it public?" They were like, "No." They want to hold on to that data because I think, once that data is out, there will be more accountability for that. So that's number one. But the second problem is if you haven't surveyed the land in a very population-heavy state properly since the 1970s, how are you possibly going to be, anywhere up in this index? But at the same time, some of the other states, I just want to mention Assam, for instance. Assam has a very different land tenure system. And originally, when we think about it, there were 4 types of land tenure systems broadly in India. There's the Zamindari system, there is the Raiyatwari system, there's the Mahalwari system, which was in the Punjab. So Zamindari was primarily Bengal, Bihar, and in northern India. Raiyatwari was primarily in southern India. Mahalwari was in Punjab. Jhum cultivation, which was the shifting cultivation, was in the northeast. Now, obviously, because the primary cultivation involved moving from one plot of land to another, there were not those kinds of land records and those kind of settled agriculture. So obviously, those states are going to be at the bottom of the list. Assam actually had a system called Exonia Patta. What that means is that, because the Brahmaputra would flood every year, basically you didn't know which next year whether your land would be flooded or not. So the government would give you a lease for 1 year. And actually this whole NRC issue and, the issue with settling into Assam, what has happened is that the people who came from outside, and not just Bangladeshi, but, Bengalis, the British had a policy of resettling people where they could be settled agriculture. So they resettled a lot of Bengali and Bihari population in Assam. And though they were used to a fixed patta system, whereas the indigenous Assamese were not. So what happened over a period of time, they were very good about getting their land registered, but the indigenous Assamese were not. And that has created, a huge issue in terms of alienation of land and this kind of resentment and discontent that the indigenous Assamese have. So given those reasons, it is not a surprise that many of these states are below in the index, and that's got historical reasons to do with it. So obviously an index is a real-time mirror. I think it's a good mirror to the government, but I think minus all this historical and contextual specificities, perhaps it would not give a fully accurate picture, and I think I'll just leave it at that. But I want to again say that as much work as we can do in this space is really important because a lot of people depend upon it, and I think there are perhaps many reasons for why there hasn't been enough political will to do this, because the more information that is out there, the less easy it becomes for the state to acquire land, create land banks. I mean, the state has taken away land at 1 rupee per acre. In 1 rupee per acre, you don't even get bubble gum these days for 1 rupee. And 1 rupee per acre, land has been taken by the state and for various purposes, for its own purposes, for public infrastructure, but also for corporations. So we really have to illuminate, shed light in the space, and that is precisely what this index has tried to do, and so I really welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita. Well, as is in defense of indices, these are meant to be simple, they are meant to be composite, they are meant to be objective to the extent that we can be objective by adding as many standardized indicators as we can and weigh them. But obviously, given the vastness of the country, given the very vast heterogeneity that you have across the states, and even within the state, laws themselves are so diverse that I think the more we discuss this, the more we realize that an index, I think, could also be perhaps complemented by certain basic case studies on what are the broad, for instance, land use came out in the last one, urban rural came out in the second. Namita has just told us about the different models that different parts of the country have had, and therefore they historically give you a good reason for why the current ranking is what it is, and perhaps also predict the next 25-30 years despite the digitization effort. So I think it's a really worthwhile sort of input to reconsider. Pranav. Yes, please, absolutely.
Recently I was in Karnataka, and I found some of the municipal panchayats, which have recently become municipalities, they are trying to learn from the mistakes of the big cities and say that, can I not make those mistakes? I was talking to them on the count of waste management, water management, and so on, and they are trying to put safeguards. No, segregation at source, management, zero waste cities, 100% recycling, so net zero cities, that kind of thing. I think if what your index can do is give them another angle, and that is how to manage their land records and how to manage so that they, today they have all the, they are a new municipality, they have all the funds to put things in place, checks and balances in place. If land records could be one of them, that would be really nice.
So Pranab, your 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think I should start first with complimenting the team, because I have also seen very closely how much difficult the work was and how much effort they had put together, because I was there also in the first study they were doing about a year back and now, and the team has grown and the learning has grown, the nuances have become more visible, and I think there are issues, but this is something which is coming together in the India data space, land data space, which is very cluttered, which is very siloed, which is not easily available land data, and particularly looking at land ownership data, I think this is a tremendous effort, and I must compliment the team in the beginning. Thank you for that. And my comments will be particularly, I'm grouping them into 3 parts. One is on the LRSA, particular to the improvement context. Second is looking at the user perspective, and third is when you look at the future. Coming to LRSA, one thing I must try to clear here, that there is a question among, discussion about rural and urban records. But if you look at India, most states have only one record system. So there is hardly few states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, who have differentiated urban and rural records. Other states like in Odisha, Bhubaneswar is under rural records. So there is no rural, there is a land record system, there is no rural and urban. So that is some clarification I wanted to make in the beginning. So the joint titling thing which Namita raised, I think we need to relook at that, because many states purposefully went for joint titling. If you look at the Planning Commission report in 80s, there was a conscious move to provide women joint titles, and many states went ahead with that due to the stamp duty reduction, due to the Hindu Succession Amendment Act, because we did a study of women land, we found that joint titling has been there. And even now with as per Hindu Succession Act, the day you are born as a daughter, you are co-personary. So joint titling should not be looked at as complexities, because it has also a different dimension. That is number one. Number two is that when you look at the land use congruence in the in terms of land, this quality of LR, I think we need to really see how more nuanced we make it. Because like garbage in, garbage out, what I've seen in like Jharkhand has scored first, but there are stories in Jharkhand where you find one complete village is put in one person's name. So this is something we need to look at when you check the quality, because all these things have been done. I understand the limitation. We did all to desk work, and we try to develop some methodology which is really innovative, but nevertheless the quality cannot become given purely based on desk work. So this has to be taken to the field. Coming to the this user perspective, I think this is something I would like to correlate the digitization to the democratization. So when you talk about democratization, we call it for the people, of the people, by the people. So I will put it like 3 things in terms of land records. It is availability, access, and usability. So availability is again of the people. Usability is this access is for the people, and usability is by the people, how they're using or not. So if you want to really see the digital democracy, we need to look at that. But if you see, there is a clear trend. So availability is there, and you come to this access, it is limited. Like you have this index where we looked at how many parameters you have to enter, whether it is and third is usability. So many places like Odisha, it's second in score, but if you take a printout, it is not useful. So I think we have to see also a kind of weightage, how we put it this availability, because this index is mostly around availability. So we have to see in terms of so that is something I wanted to highlight. Third, coming to the what next. So one of the important area I think is looking at the because now land is a state subject, data are scattered across state. So if you want to report SDG, if you want to provide an India level picture, you need to have a kind of system which put it together. The data are in space. We also local languages, different formats. So what is the interoperability? So we need to also provide some kind of I don't know, how are the standards, the way they are putting the data, are the standards maintained? And with that comes in the use of ethics and privacy, the way data. And more importantly, what is also very important when you question the way land administration is taken up, the way you document the tenure. Like we document tenure in every linear relationship, owner and not a owner. But as you know in the field, the tenure is much more complex, much more continuous, much more informal. If you look at from, like the way Namita was telling, like Odisha tenure will be different because we have got scheduled area for 40%. And then you have got like Rayatwari state, your this RTC is there, so the land record. So we have to also look at a kind of different system of recommending the states how should they go about tenure documentation. So that is number one. Number two, this is important is that now how the data is like this is accessible. So, but is the data is going to be useful for a larger policy advocacy? The data is going to use for the market, for the SDG, because SDG reporting requires two land indicators to be reported, 1.4.2 and 5.1. Both the things are not available. Women land rate data is not available because the data is not disaggregated. So we are not giving any state discredit for not putting women land rate data. So this is something important where DILRMP has clearly addressed the state that when I think Bandana, she was Secretary DOLR, or letter 15 was sent to all the state that you disaggregate the land records, you put women name. But now no state except West Bengal and some other state, there is no gender parameter in land record. So we are not discouraging any state, we are giving all state highest part. So that is something also we need to look at. And second thing, when you look at this 1.4.2, I think it is good that you are looking at perception index, but we have to see whether these land records are really contributing to SDG reporting. Because as of now, Niti Aayog's dashboard is reporting 5A1 based on agriculture census, and they are not reporting 1.4.2. They are reporting 1.4.2 based on asset ownership. So this is something really worrisome. And last but not the least, like someone was telling this garbage in, garbage out, we got remembered. So, and this Madhav was talking about this syncing the actual, spatial and textual. Ultimate aim of land digitization is to sync these things. So in no state we find it is syncing. It is purely, again, whatever was there, the old records, old cadastral maps, the old things have been just computerized. So if we really give the states based on this scoring, are we not really making the state more complacent? Thank you.
Wow. Wow, good. I mean, those are points. But again, going back to the economics, the statistics of it, these are questions that can be addressed. Them, it's really about then including these, right? To make them SDG compliant. Well, you'll have to just see what are the different factors in land ownership or records of it that go into the SDG, and you'll have to include those and give them some weightage. The other issue is, of course, there are perhaps variations. I mean, cities and state is one, but perhaps there are variations within the state across district levels. And of course, as you get more into the precision policy making nature to policy making in India, perhaps also just look at variance within the state. So right now what you're considering are just averages. Look at the variations across the districts. That just gives you another richer layer of information to really aggregate and to perhaps get something richer out of it. Otherwise, I've heard garbage in, garbage out. I'm beginning to worry. But objectivity of an index eventually will rest on how much we can defend it in terms of what is the driving objective, what are the really capture objectively again. There will always be variation, right? But what variances can we actually capture in order to then say it is indeed apples and apples, or perhaps red apple and green apple, but really not going too much into big differences that it lends itself to the credibility of the exercise. Now I open questions to the floor. Please ask away, and we have about 10 minutes. Pass the mics around, please. The fatigue is telling, no?
Garbage in, garbage out, I'd like to qualify that. When the garbage is out there for you to see, when it was in files, nobody knew that it was garbage. But when garbage goes out for you to see, I see a lot of people coming back and saying, can I get this rectified? What they've done is, what was in the file has been digitized. That was the first step, and I think it's a great first step. But the minute somebody challenges it, no land records office around the country is saying, don't challenge it. They're saying, if you see a discrepancy, come here and get it rectified. And I think to that extent, that garbage out is very.
That's an important point, and it also goes to sunlight being the best disinfectant, and I think that also goes a little bit counter to. I do care a great deal about privacy, but these are first steps. There are always steps towards really going to what might be the optimal outcome. You want?
This is a very important question, but many states are really not develop a mechanism to correct the records. So this is something important. So like while putting the records, so there should be a mechanism for the redressal. So this is not has been, I think sir can highlight it because we found it when, because what is happening sometimes the record is, the way also it is typed, it is wrong.
Yeah.
The record is correct.
Yeah.
The person who typed it, they typed it wrongly. So when you go to correct it, so the redressal mechanism has not been properly in place.
Actually, I was talking only of Karnataka. I studied Karnataka, did a deep dive in Karnataka. There I found that they are doing it. I wouldn't be able to generalize across states.
Yes.
Actually, this online record that we are trying to prepare is useful only if online transaction could be made facilitated. That could be facilitated. Like in share market, when it was dematerialized and online, and everything, entire transaction was completed online. Now here in this case, particularly in the land case, now there are records, in fact yesterday also I checked in many cases, that 70 years old, 80 years old records are there. Now so far there is no division happened in that family. So still land is lying in one guy's name. Now he has 6 sons, 6 daughters, every son has 5 sons, 3 daughters. Now no record is there. Now suppose someone from that family comes out and sells a part of the land. Okay? Land that can be registered also. Now the issue is this, that can be challenged. Now somebody has got into that kind of a transaction, and even if suppose, if that old guy's name, on whose name that property is there, even if he is registering that property in somebody else's name, even that can be challenged. So the issue is this, that what is the use of this entire record? I understand, it's a very good mark, but suppose in the Gram Sevak or BLW, if he keeps updating that, okay, this gentleman is there, this is the land, he is not saying that, okay, you divide it, but at least who are the next in genealogy, who are there in that family, if that record is also maintained with that record, then at least it can be made more useful. Or otherwise, what is going to happen that nobody knows. I mean, this land record is
Sure.
almost
we get
useless.
It, we get it. Any other questions? Yes, sir. हाँ बिल्कुल.
मैं बिहार का रहने वाला हूँ और मैं प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करना चाह रहा हूँ.
थोड़ा एक्सपीरियंस शॉर्ट में शेयर करिएगा क्योंकि टाइम खत्म. हाँ.
जमीन लैंड डिजिटलाइजेशन हो गया, आज अपने रैंकिंग में नीचे से चौथा स्थान पे आया है, लेकिन बहुत से प्लॉट छूटे हुए थे जिसको कि कंप्यूटर में वो नहीं डाला है. उसके लिए मैंने व्यक्तिगत रूप से पीएम तक को एप्लीकेशन दिया. बाबू कहता है कि भाई 500 रुपये दे दीजिए किसी को, अपने नहीं मानता है, किसी को दे दीजिए वो करवा देगा. सेकेंड इशू जो अभी मान्यवर ने डिस्कस किया, हमारे ग्रैंडफादर के ग्रैंडफादर जो होंगे उनके नाम एक जमीन था, कागज तो उस समय उनके पास था, और बिहार में जो लैंड रिकॉर्ड ही बना अराउंड 90 इयर्स के बाद, अब वो लैंड छोटे छोटे टुकड़े में 200 400 गज के बन गए हैं. डॉक्यूमेंट्स तो है नहीं किसी के पास, किसी के पास थोड़ा होगा, सड़ गया होगा, लेकिन वो जमीन बिहार सरकार अपने नाम कर दिया है. दखल में हम लोग हैं, हम लोग उस पर खेती कर रहे हैं, लेकिन आज भी वह रिकॉर्ड में सरकार का हो गया है. अब उसके लिए यदि आप जाए ब्लॉक में कर्मचारी जो लैंड रेवेन्यू ऑफिसर्स हैं, उनसे बात करें कि ये लैंड को होना चाहिए, हमारा दखल में है, बोलते हैं कि कागज दिखाओ. अब कागज ऐसे प्रदेश में कहाँ से आ सकता है? तो ये दो इशू हमारे नजर में हमने व्यक्तिगत रूप से
जी
किया है.
जी
तो particularly I want to share.
बिल्कुल एकदम. आप यस.
Thanks for the discussion. My question is, as you have mentioned, the goal is to strengthen this research. So, do you think there is any role for the community, those who own the land? What can they offer? Because what you are talking about is surveys with the community, talking to the community, but systems organized together and offering whether it's community participation or mobilization, because in the first slide when Omidyar was telling that they are projecting that people will come online in the next 10 decades, many more millions of people. So what role community has for such research to talk about their own land?
Okay, now I don't think any of the authors are online, here but broadly, they are planning a part 2 to the exercise, which really is about perception. It is about going out and talking to people. So it's a primary survey being done on land and records and how clean it is and how difficult the transactions are to really measure what the transaction costs in reality are. So that is one where users, well, it's not really community, but it's users. But community enforcement, I think a point which KP made, and it sort of went in passing, but very worthwhile, that it's not always the state and the individual. Many things eventually should also be delegated to local level institutions like panchayat, the village community, right? In order to settle some of these disputes, जैसे वो बिहार की बात कर रहे हैं, there will be some amount of that will depend on history within the village, what is fair. Delhi maybe, agar Delhi mein you can get a community together. Now let us give 2 minutes to each of the authors, the speakers, to basically respond to the 3 questions, please.
So quick comment on the gentleman's question about mutations not being recorded. Like Jayashree pointed out, the record being digitized as is yeah, but now the transaction has taken place. So your scenario here is that no mutation took place. One of the heirs sold off the land, but the record is accessible to the other heirs as well, right? So the fact that the record is digitized is useful for everybody involved. Now, the forum for solving the issue of the record being inaccurate is not the researcher. So that is the court, and the court is where it will get solved. And that's okay. I mean, that is how the system is designed.
No. We're not talking about that.
Correct.
But eventually, sir, they are trying to tell you, research का क्या job है? What will creation of land record in itself achieve? To have better defined property rights, therefore transactions are so. In your case, what you're saying, if there is one transaction which really ideally should involve many others, the hope is that when you have land records and it is made public and accessible, even if it is not public, then the other parties who are involved have all the incentive to go out and start this issue. That is all.
Or they have a mode to detect it. Like if the title is changed in the name of one of the descendants, then that is a way to detect the fact that somebody has done some mischief, right? I mean that's the limited point here. Which draws from Jayashree's point about just putting the information as it is out there has value. The second thing is for the comment that the gentleman made about about Bihar, about the state of land records. We can't see this as a substitute for essential administrative processes of settlement. And that settlement is where the point that you mentioned comes in, which is where the community is involved. So the settlement process involves the community. The measurement of whether the record is accurate or not, I don't know how you would involve a community in it. Maybe there are some ways that I can't see.
I'm afraid I'm still going to stick to the urban because that's what I understand. But I'll tell you that around on the periphery of every city is a huge plot market. And that's what I'm studying currently. One of the things that I've noticed is that, yes, there are, like the CMDA, the GDA, there are authorities which have to authorize the conversion of that land. However, because that land is converted, it is more expensive. But a lot of people who buy the lands are buying revenue lands, which are unconverted, which are agricultural. In some states, you can't buy it, but people go ahead and buy it, okay? The limited point of that I'm making is, when that document is out there in the public domain, it should actually spur the local authority to say that, why are you selling revenue land? You are taking away the income that the governance process should give to the ULB. That's not happening. I'm hoping that, where Mr. Krishnan also said, why can't the political leadership find find merit in this? I think you need to make a case for this being a way of bringing transparency, which the state benefits from, the individual benefits from, and therefore it is something that should be on the agenda. You asked about community groups, sir. Community groups have a huge role to play here. I think much of the advocacy comes through community groups, and that's where the second round of their thing is going to be critical. Today they have just taken access and put it there. If as community groups you find value in that, and that goes for you too, sir. As an individual you can't fight, but as a group of people, which what RERA says, across India, fight in groups, fight to win. If you want to do that, at least the documents you don't have to run around in circles because they put it in the public domain.
So I'll take both the questions that were raised on this side of the hall together. So I think one thing that we need to understand is that there are two narratives about land. One is the state's narrative and that one is the people's narrative. And there is a difference between the two. Because, and this dates back to the British period, because the British government basically, any land that was not being tilled was taken over by the British, whether it was forest land, whether it was coastal land, and so on. Whereas the people who were dependent upon that land for their livelihood, whether it's the scheduled tribes and other forest-dwelling communities, whether it was other groups of people, fisher folk, tenants, and so on, they definitely were on the land, in possession of the land, and therefore they were resisting those claims to begin with. So first of all, there is a historical reason for why there is this conflict over land, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. And the second issue, of course, is the fact that, because government has all this unused land, we're just building land banks and so on. Obviously, people who are dependent upon the land for livelihood, 60% of India's population after 70 years is dependent upon the land for the livelihood. They are going to go and, take up that land. And that is what land reforms were supposed to do. Land reforms were supposed to give at least a homestead a piece of land to everyone, so that they wouldn't have to go and so-called encroach government land, although it is not clear whether the government has encroached people's land or people have encroached government land. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And therein lies a problem with involving the community. Why? Because in many states, there is a huge mistrust between the community and the state. Jharkhand, which is very high on this index, Jharkhand has very specialized land laws. There is the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act and the Sandhal Parganas Tenancy Act, which imposes restrictions on transfer of land. Recently, the government, all for ease of doing business, land markets, and so on, wanted to amend these laws. It led to such backlash. We saw that the government recently lost the elections. It was said that, it was various reasons have been put out in electoral discourse. A large reason for that was the fact that, land is such a central thing for not just the livelihoods of the people, but also from the point of view of their cultural identity. More than half the land of Jharkhand is in the scheduled areas. The population of Jharkhand, 26% of the population is tribal population. So we have to remember, we should not be reifying markets in any domain, whether it is capital and labor, because there is something intrinsic to labor as well, which cannot be expended. But particularly in the context of land, land is not a commodity. Land is a resource which has an economic, social, but most importantly, cultural resonance. For all the money in the world, the Vedanta, when Vedanta wanted to mine the Niyamgiri hills, that hill itself is sacred to the community. And that is something that has to be remembered and respected when we are thinking about these issues. And in response to your question, so actually, this whole thing that we are moving towards conclusive titling is a bit of a myth. The reason why is because, the Transfer of Property Act of 1882, which the British made, and this is a law that is applicable not just in India, but also in East Africa. The same law is applicable in countries like Kenya and so on. Basically, that law knew this. They knew that they were coming into a system where there were multiple, land rights and so on, and they just wanted to acquire the land, the British, but at the same time, there were a series of rights that needed to be clarified. So actually the act itself says that, for instance, the situation that you're describing, it is called a holder in due course. So ideally, if you have bought a piece of land in good faith from someone who was not empowered to represent it, then land should belong to you. But given that that is the case, how will conclusive titling sort of come in? The other thing in the law, and which is there in common law understanding of property also, is that possession is 9/10 of the law. So in the example that you're giving, you have a very strong claim, because they say if, under the 1882 Act also, if for more than 10 years you have been, possessing the land without disturbance. Now, if the government has been, coming and asking you to get out of the land, then that doesn't work. But supposing the government didn't do anything about the land for 10 years, actually there is a very strong presumption the land belongs to you. So I think we have a long way to go before conclusive titling comes in. Let us not fool ourselves that digitizing land records is what is going to necessarily get us there. I think we have 1,000 land laws in India at least, and that's a project that we are currently working on. How many laws on land do we have? When we talk about encumbrances, some encumbrances may be registered. There are many laws that create encumbrances which may not even be registered on the record. So, we need to think about all of these things. We really need to build knowledge in this area. And not just from the administrative practice point of view, because land record is what the administration maintains, not just from the, the disputes point of view, which is where the judiciary comes in, but from the basic law itself, that, what are the laws relating to land? We don't know.
Thank you. Excellent. Pranav, do you have any response to any of the questions? Any remaining that has not been addressed by anyone?
Okay, I'll take just 1 minute. The answer to the first two questions can be told in a small story of a village in Rayagada, in Odisha, where we found in the Bhunaksha there are about 500 parcels. In Bhunaksha 300 parcels, in Bhulek 500 parcels, and actual 200 parcels. So that is a classical case of updating error. So it has nothing to do with, so land record digital try to address that. So these two cases of Bihar and A, yeah, so that is what, exactly. And coming to the second thing that Paras raised, I think the solution in future is localizing the land record updation and land governance. Examples of, like, government tried to do it through PESA. Forest Right Act clearly delegate to Forest Right Committee, and Forest Right Committee and Gram Sabha have been successfully doing it. In Northeast, village authorities have been successfully doing it. In many parts of the world, counties have been successfully doing it. So the solution lying in delegating this thing to local level and localizing land governance. I think that is no way to government, the way we are centralizing. In a way, digitalization is not really democratizing, decentralizing, it is centralizing the land reform. So I think that is need to be also looked at. Thank you.
Except that on the 74th Amendment, we really haven't gone very far. So I'm not sure we have the local bodies, we have those organizations, which you think, I mean, it sounds very nice, but eventually we also have to recognize the institutional capacity that is there to really make use, right? But fantastic. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the speakers. You all brought out such good inputs. Thank you.
I would request Shreya Deb and Professor D.B. Gupta for their closing remarks and vote of thanks.
Okay, I really don't have much to say, but I'm just so excited, first of all, to see the index. So thank you so much to the NCAR team. Tremendous amount of work. I've seen it, grow over the months, and really glad to see this come out. And look forward to much more coming out from the Property Rights Research Consortium. Thank you everyone for your patience. Very grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Shamika, actually, lots and lots of people and the panelists and the moderators have been responsible for this success. So I just thought that while you are here and while others are here, let me say thank you to everyone who participated in this long journey, starting from K.P. Krishnan, Shekhar Shah, Deepak Sanan in a meeting, and then coming to conclusion of the first part today. So I would like to say thank you. Second set of people I just like to thank are the young professionals who were identified in the morning. They were really the guys under Deepak's leadership, Somnath's leadership, ably supported by Prerna, Anika, Charu, and the entire team of economists, lawyers, sociologists, and planners. They were as a coffee taker. Then I would like to thank the various actors, particularly Avinash Singh and his team, for helping us in the visualization and in the creation of the portal, and we'll continue to seek their help. Thank you, Avinash, and thank you, your team. We'll also like to thank the members of the advisory committee. Namita is there, Pranav is there, and few others were there. Ram Singh has gone, but they were the people. Then there is Shashank Bhide, who was formerly the director of the MIDS and now with us. So thanks everyone. I would like to say thank you to my Director General, who should not be ignored, who have in completely tiring us out from early hours of the morning to late in the evening, giving some of the most fantastic ideas. Our thanks to him, Anil and Ravi Panda, our Director Administration, and our Finance Officer. I took away all the authority from them, saying that भाई बाद में मैं मेरे को माफ़ कर देना हम सब. So all the sanctions were given, but without that nothing would have happened. There's one set of people, the knowledge correspondents, I mean, whose role we did not point out, and the translators, because we had to deal with several languages and 37 states and union territories. The help that we got from them, they were all revenue officials at one stage or the other, and this is where Deepak's high contacts were extremely helpful, but for him, we would have not been anywhere. Then there's the entire staff, the catering staff, our maintenance staff, and all the staff that helped us, media, then the communication, Shilpi, and everyone. I don't want to ignore anyone, but IT team, information technology team, and then there is the man in black sitting at the back, Somnath Seth, who has been always on the back bench, helping us enormously, and some of the things which we would have ignored, he was able to point them out. Thank you so. And thank you everybody. If I've left anybody, printers, of course, at last moment we were making corrections at 4 o'clock in the morning today, and they did carry that out. And so thank you everybody. Thank you. And Samika has to be in a meeting at 6 o'clock. So
now you will get me a helicopter. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you all for sticking with us. Now you all can join us for the high tea.
And no, let me say 3 claps for Anika and her team, and Shilpa and Shreya for being so supportive. Say cheers for them. Thank you, Wen. Thank you, Anika. And thank you, Deepak and Prerna.